afternoon. Thank you for joining our October 21st Policy Management Committee meeting. I'm Rebecca Smondrowski. I'm going to allow my colleagues to introduce themselves. I have been appointed as the new chair of this committee. Why don't I allow you all to introduce yourselves first.
Judy Daca. Good afternoon, Shebra Evans.
Good afternoon, Hannah Linney, student member.
So I want to welcome everybody, staff and everyone. I'm stepping, as I think all of you know, I'm stepping into this position which was previously held by the late Honorable Patricia O'Neill. And I know I have big shoes to fill. As everybody pretty much knows, Pat was the longest serving member of the Board of Education in our county's history. And for much of that time, she either chaired or served as a member of the policy committee. She was our board historian and policy expert for sure, and she understood the importance of policy as a central driver of the district's work. And while she viewed policy as the anchor that grounds our decision making, she was also never afraid to explore and enact innovative policies to improve teaching and learning for our students or in response to changing conditions in our community. I have very much valued my years serving with Pat, Ms. O'Neill, on the policy committee, and I appreciate the opportunity to continue to honor her legacy through this important work. Today we have a very full agenda, so why don't we get started? Before we introduce staff with the informational summary, does anybody have any questions or comments or changes about the May 27th? No? Okay. Do we need to move that for approval? No, because, right? All right. So item number 3, we are going to, is the draft work plan. I am going to ask Ms. Turner to, not sure how to say your last name, but Turner Pervical? Okay. To provide a quick overview and ask committee members if they have any questions or anything, and if not, then we'll just go ahead and approve it.
Good afternoon. Leslie Turner Percival, Legal Director in the Office of General Counsel for Montgomery County Public Schools. You have in front of you the draft 2021-2022 work plan. You'll see a very robust plan going forward, but also recommendation of the large volume of policies completed last year. 6 policies were amended or created last year. Those are listed towards the bottom of the draft work plan. Continued work carrying over from last year includes policy JPH, School Food and Nutrition Services Program, policy JGA, Student Discipline, and policy FFA, Naming School Facilities. Now, JPH is a new policy that has been the subject of previous conversations with this committee. This policy is under development in response to a federal requirement that the board create a policy to address meals for all students, regardless of their ability to pay. Policy JGA, Student Discipline, which you will hear more about today, is under revision in response to a state requirement to include specific language in policy regarding restorative, trauma-informed practices. We will be reviewing these draft revisions with you this afternoon. I will get back to FFA in a moment, but on the work plan, we have items referred by resolution or another board committee. Now, this work includes the creation of an attendance policy, continued work on policy KEA, political campaigns and political materials, a portion of which was suspended last year, and policy ECN, telecommunications transmission facilities. Several policies are recommended for the committee to take up this year. Policy ABA, community involvement, policy ECA, energy conservation, policy IOD, education of English language learners, policy IJA, school counseling programs and services, policy CND, school-related fundraising, and policy CNE, facility improvements that are not funded with Montgomery County revenues. Mr. Landesman and his team will be presenting you with a framework for the revision of policy ABA, community involvement. Just a note that in taking up ABA, this presents an opportunity for viewing stakeholder engagement from a wide perspective and creating a comprehensive, inclusive model that can be used system-wide with only certain adaptations required by specific topic. This presents a further opportunity for tailoring FFA in such a way to eliminate redundancies and inconsistencies between the system-wide process and processes specific to naming or renaming MCPS facilities. A further note on ECA energy conservation, the Fiscal Management Committee has referred policy ECA for a rewrite to expand its focus from energy conservation to more broadly address sustainability in alignment with state law requiring a sustainability policy to be in place by July 2022. You will also note that 3 annual reports will be coming this year. Today you will hear 2 of these reports: the annual update on the implementation of JHC, child abuse and neglect, and proposals for the 2022-2023 school year calendar. Ms. Smondrowski.
Sorry. I was saying, do any of you all have any thoughts or changes, concerns, or anything that? No? No? Okay, well then we will consider this approved. And the next area is item 4. So the policy for item 4 is about our school year calendar. Just to remind everybody a little bit of the timeline, we will decide on the preferable scenarios, and they will be recommended by the committee to the full board at the October 26th board meeting. And then it will go out for public comment for about 1 month to be brought back to the board for final adoption at the December 2nd meeting. So with that, I will introduce Doug Hollis and Ginny Dawson as the presenters for our school year calendar.
Greetings, Ms. Smondrowski and members of the board. This is our annual opportunity to present the Policy IDA school year calendar to the Policy Management Committee. As stated in Policy IDA, in addition to approving the school year calendar on an annual basis and no later by the end of December, the board shall adopt a contingency calendar indicating the days that could be used to make up the IDA. I'll be presenting with Doug today, the Executive Director of Finance and Operations. And this presentation is to update the committee on our collaborative work with our staff, both internally and external stakeholders, and provide an opportunity to discuss scenarios for the school year 2022-23 calendar. Last year, we suspended the policy IDA during the pandemic and did not adopt the calendar until March, as we did not know how we'd be directed by the Maryland State Board of Education and what requirements would be before us at the local level. We're pleased with the work and rolled directly into our new planning for SY 2022-23. This summer, MCPS staff began to discuss the calendar for 2022-23 internally. This included conversations with the Innovative School Planning team. Over the last month, we have met with large cross-functional groups, including Office of Teaching and Learning, General Counsel, Labor Relations, Shared Accountability, ERSKI, Athletics, Communications, Testing and Assessments team, and Student Leadership. We've also met with other stakeholders, including students, parents, parent leadership groups, interfaith groups, principals, and teachers. Today, we're before the Policy Management Committee to glean from you your insight and feedback on our work and specifically some draft scenarios that we'll present today. Following our discussion, we'll make the necessary updates and present the policy IDA at next week's board meeting for additional review, discussion, and feedback. We'll use this and the input from the public to present a final recommendation for the calendar for board action during the December 2nd board meeting. Can we have the next slide, please? You see our timeline. I now turn the presentation over to Doug.
Next slide, please. Before we proceed in sharing scenarios, we do want to highlight parameters as established by the Annotated Code, Chapter 7, Article 103. The list before you represents holidays mandated by code or Maryland law that must be recognized by public schools in Maryland. You will see the dates for each holiday here, and we will point them out as we walk through the scenarios. Next slide. As you all recall, the requirements around the school year starting following Labor Day and ending by June 15th was addressed in state legislation a few years ago. This is no longer a restriction in our calendar. Our scenarios show what a before Labor Day and what a after Labor Day start looks like. Spring break in all scenarios includes 6 full days and 2 weekends. Professional development is something we continue to hear feedback about. In the scenarios, we have attempted to consider this important feedback and ensure our instructors and school teams have an opportunity to appropriately plan together throughout the year. We believe this to be beneficial to our students and families as well. The innovative school planning team has worked alongside us in the development of these scenarios. Upon a recommendation to the board in December, they will have a parallel innovative calendar that will show innovative schools and traditional schools aligned around when the system status is opened or closed, as well as their other unique innovative aspects. These key considerations are reflections of our engagement. It's important for the development of the calendar to continue to be a dialogue with many groups and stakeholders and individuals from our larger parent community, student community, and individuals that all bring additional perspectives connected to their heritage, culture, and faith. We will continue to meet with internal and external stakeholders, even after our communications teams makes potential scenarios available for public feedback and comments through November. Before we proceed in sharing scenarios, we do want to highlight a few things here. All the scenarios that you will see today, there will be 3 of them. I will walk fully through the first scenario, Scenario A, and then point out the major differences in Scenario B and C. As the case in past years, all scenarios can be modified. The modifications could potentially include elements of another scenario. The scenarios are meant to demonstrate possibilities and impacts based on how the dates fall for school year 22-23. Next slide. Before you is Scenario A. I would like to bring to your attention a few things as we walk through this scenario. Labor Day is Monday, September the 5th. This scenario shows the school year beginning on Tuesday, August the 30th. The Tuesday start shown here exists to provide 6 days of pre-service for staff at the start of the year. September has the Labor Day holiday and a non-instructional day on September 26th. On October the 5th is another non-instructional day. September 26th is the same day as Rosh Hashanah, and October 5th is the same day as Yom Kippur. In October, there is a professional development day on October the 24th, seen here in light pink. This is the date of Diwali. There are a number of additional professional development days throughout the calendar in the teal or greenish color. These days all align with a full day for grading and planning at the end of each quarter. The first half of the year has the traditional holidays. Also, we have Tuesday, November the 8th in light blue, which is there for the holiday for Election Day. The Thanksgiving holiday is preceded, as tradition, with 3 early release days, with that Monday and Tuesday being designated for parent-teacher conferences. In this scenario, winter break will begin on Friday, December 23rd. Students will return to school Tuesday, January the 3rd. Spring break precedes the Friday before Easter and the Monday after Easter. The last day of the school year in scenario A is Thursday, June the 15th, seen in the pink color. Makeup days are at the end of each scenario and throughout the calendar. Additionally, many staff members have asked for more professional planning time during the school year, specifically in their buildings. There are some early release days throughout the calendar, but I do want to point out the additional days: September the 14th, December the 7th, and March the 15th. These additions returns us to similar schedules and PD opportunities of the past prior to when the governor established the start and end times for the public school year. Lastly, Lunar New Year and Eid are days that have been professional development days in past calendars. As of now, both of these days fall on weekends for 2023. Lunar New Year is Sunday, January the 22nd, and Eid al-Fitr begins Friday, April 21st at sundown. These are lunar holidays, so they can shift to be earlier or later, but as of now, they have no direct impact on school year 22-23's instructional calendar. Next slide. This is scenario B. The big difference in scenario B is the start and ending date for the school year. Scenario B is an example of starting after Labor Day on Tuesday, September the 6th. The last day of the school year in this scenario is Thursday, June the 22nd. Spring break here lands in the same place as scenario A, before the Friday before Easter and the Monday after Easter. The holidays, non-instructional, and early release days are similar in both examples. Next slide. And this is the final scenario, scenario C. It's similar to scenario A, as it begins on Tuesday, August the 30th, and ends on Thursday, June the 15th. The big difference in scenario C is around spring break. Spring break here lands following the Friday before Easter and the Monday after Easter. The holidays, non-instructional, and early release days are all similar in all 3 examples, as I previously stated. I also want to note that in all scenarios, quarter 3 ends right before spring break. So there is a professional development day before the start of spring break as well. Here in scenario C, you will see that on Thursday, April the 6th. This concludes just the walkthrough of the scenarios. I now turn it back over to you, Ms. Mondrowski, for any discussion and additional questions.
So thank you. Thank you very much for all of the work that you all have done on all this. Having served on the committee years ago as a representative for the community, I know how much work goes into these calendars, so I appreciate it all. I only have one question, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues, but January 2nd, being a Monday, I'm curious as to why that is indicated as a holiday, and if that is something that we've considered not doing and moving the last school day to the Wednesday.
It's a great question. So January the 2nd, two things here. One is for the system and our employees, we generally do note the holiday the day after the holiday if it falls on a weekend. So system-wide for 12-month employees and others who work in central office, it would be important to note that. The other thing here I would say is in 2000, I think it's 16, 17 calendar, we had similar scenario where New Year's Day fell on Sunday. And in that calendar scenario, we made the decision to note it the same way with the second, that Monday being a holiday. I do believe we may have an option here, and so we did consider that, but we did just decide to go with what we had done in the past and to provide clarity for staff around what days they had off, considering the holiday.
Okay, great. Dr. Daka, do you have any thoughts, questions, comments? No? Ms. Evans?
No, so I appreciate the work that's gone into the calendar. I had a quick question. So on calendar B, where school starts on September the 5th, am I to assume that pre-service would begin on Friday, August the 26th to give the 6 days? Is that when it would start?
So it's a great question. And what I will say is we are still considering if that is an option and something that we choose to do, how we make sure that we get all of the duty days, particularly the professional development days that we are committed to for our staff. It could be a Friday, but it could be other places in the calendar with minor adjustments, but hopefully not to impact the start and the end of the school year.
All right. And thank you for pointing out all of the holidays that we have made professional days. So that was helpful to hear that. And no, I don't have any other questions because I think, like you said, you were very self-explanatory. The calendars are pretty similar, all the days with exception of spring break on one and then the start and end time. Okay, so it's clear. Thank you.
Ms. Aluni?
Yes, again, I want to thank you both for the work that you put in, particularly Mr. Hollis for coming to my SMOB Advisory Council meeting at like 8 p.m. on a Wednesday. We had like 200 kids stay after the meeting to talk about this calendar. So
Wow.
I appreciate the work that you put into this. I know you shared with us orally the reason we have professional development days on certain religious and cultural holidays. Would it be possible to note that on here at all?
Yeah, I think that is a wonderful thing to do. And and the way that we recognize a few things on the calendar, there's two pieces. At the point in which we adopt the calendar, we will have this graphic. And I think what you're stating is, can we update it and make an additional note? And I think Ms. Mondrosky had asked me previously, and we looked at a couple other school districts' calendars that have noted those types of things. And so I think that is a place for improvement on this. Additionally, though, on our web browser, we link our calendar to the county's calendar that does recognize all of a number of observances, many that I didn't even name today. And so I think like we've made that improvement from the web base, but for the static picture or this kind of graphic, this is something that we can look into definitely.
Yeah, I think even before sending these different options out to our community, it would be really helpful to have even the holidays that we didn't have room or couldn't recognize. I think it's important to have that context before the community makes a decision as well.
I would agree, even the ones that fall on weekends.
Even the
If we
ones
can
that fall on
just-
weekends or on
Note it.
school days.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate the feedback. And I will say that in the conversations with many internal and external stakeholders, the key topics have been around the beginning and ending of the year, spring break, and then how we recognize a number of different cultures throughout our calendar in consistent ways, but ways that definitely are sensitive and appreciate all.
Thank you.
I do just want to remind us that if we are listing those type of holidays, any that are floating, the date may change, if we could just specify that so that people understand that when they follow the moon and things like that, the dates might be adjusted. So whatever we put in writing does not necessarily mean it might not change.
Absolutely.
Just for clarification for our people. Okay. So anybody have any other thoughts or questions before we move to send it to the full board, out for public comment? Does it go to the full board first? Yes, it goes to the full board on the 26th. So, no? Anyone? Okay. Then we will go ahead and move this to the full board on the October 26th meeting, which is on Tuesday. Okay.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for everything. Okay, that brings us to item 5, policy JGA, student discipline. Let's see what we have here. So as, again, kind of a little bit of a background reminder, the Policy Management Committee approved draft revisions to policy JGA to address restorative practices and trauma-informed interventions back on February 18th of 2020. The draft was anticipated to go to the board for tentative action on March 10th, 2020, but it was postponed due to COVID. So this item is now returning to the committee today in an effort to refresh our recollection and get another overall review of the policy, get it back on track so that we can move forward with it. With that, I will let you all take it away.
Okay, as the staff from the Office of Teaching, Learning, and Schools join us at the table, they will introduce themselves. I will give Ms. Davis here with us at the table the opportunity to provide some history on this policy.
Good afternoon, Sally Davis, Policy Specialist with the Office of the General Counsel. Mrs. Mondrowski, you've done an excellent recap. That's excellent. Just to point out a few things where this language came from, we needed to bring JGA into alignment with state statutes, regulatory requirements, as well as some board policies. So the Maryland legislature passed an amendment in 2019 that required preventative and proactive restorative behavior intervention strategies in policy. Code of Maryland regulations required measures to address trauma-informed practices and other updates that are in the policy. And then the Safe to Learn Act, Maryland Safe to Learn Act, required measures to address implicit bias and disparities in disciplinary practices. Let's see, we can move forward a slide. And one more slide. Excellent, okay. And especially the Maryland Safe to Learn was addressed in policy ACA, which the board amended in June of last spring, but there are further development of those ideas here in JGA. So at the request of the committee in 2020, we annotated the policy so that updates that originated from statutes or regulations were clearer. And these annotations are highlighted in gray. And then our purpose today is to restart your consideration of these updates, as well as to consider some additional updates from the Office of Teaching, Learning, and Schools. And just to assist you, those updates are underlined. There's a lot going on in this policy. So Mrs. Duranby and her colleagues from OTLS have prepared a presentation to assist you in your consideration of these updates. And if it's acceptable to you, I will just invite Mrs. Duranby to begin.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Chairperson Mondrowski, Ms. Evans, Ms. O'Looney, and Dr. Daka. Thank you for letting us share a little with you today. I would ask that we move to the next slide, please. So Ms. Davis has just shared with you how our Maryland House Bill 725 has required us to change our language to include practices that are restorative justice practices as a part of our school discipline policy. We would like to add and share, if you move to the next slide, please, that these changes are not just important because the law demands them. They are important because they are part of our core values. So we say and we live by these core values. And I highlighted a few of them today. We talk about analyzing and reflecting upon evidence to improve our practices. We talk about building relationships with our diverse communities that helps us to understand their perspectives and experiences. We talk about fair treatment, honesty, openness as being essential. And we talk about and practice that personal growth in all areas, academic, behavioral, emotional, and social, inspires all of us towards excellence. And most importantly, we say that each and every student matters, and that therefore outcomes should not be predictable by race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and that equity really demands the elimination of all gaps. And that includes in our behavioral disproportionalities. So today I wanted to talk about language, and as a former ESOL teacher, language is very important to me. What we decide to communicate really matters. Next slide, please. Our current policy talks about discipline. I can't tell you how many times it's listed all throughout. I think we did a count on how many times we were changing that. And discipline in itself talks about correction of disobedience. Right, correction. And that correction can be for the moment. When students are suspended from school, they come back. When students are expelled from school, 45 days, they might serve at another placement. They come back. As a middle school principal, I've experienced that many times. And so instead, we have to focus on the root, not just correction for correction's sake, but what is the cause of this behavior so that it doesn't happen again? If something happens, is there a way back? Students have to know that there's hope, that there's possibility to restore. And for those who were hurt, even more, that they have to be acknowledged and have to know that this is something that we can work on. We are a community. So I wanted to highlight a lot of that because I don't think discipline fully encompasses that. That word alone is not enough to express all that we do, all that we work in, all that we practice and endeavor to imply. Next slide, please. I wanted to pause and talk about what restorative justice is because it is in the House bill as well as in some of the policy changes. So I wanted us to have a standing understanding that it is an approach. It is an approach to building community, self-care, and conflict resolution. It's a platform that allows students to really take responsibility for their actions. It's an approach that allows us to work with those affected, not just those who have committed instances of misbehavior, right? It is about all of us, and it is truly about true accountability and a deep level of accountability. I wanted to clarify on the next slide a common misconception of restorative justice. A common misconception is that restorative justice does not allow for accountability or consequence. This is far from the truth. In some scenarios and circumstances, restorative justice is not an approach that is to be applied. And we talk about that in terms of sexual assault or sexual harassment, right? Restorative justice does not negate a consequence altogether, right? Instead, it focuses on what is most appropriate, where is the lesson learned, and how can we ensure that this is not repeated behavior. I know that many times suspension data has been presented before this panel. And one of the things that is interesting to look at, other than disproportionality, is the number of repeat suspensions. This week, I worked with a school who had a student recommended for a 10-and-E, recommended for expulsion. She was recommended for that the day she came back from a 4-day suspension. That tells me that whatever the root was 4 days prior was not addressed because the action was repeated again. If we do not work and practice and communicate and express and teach to address the root, then we'll have the same patterns again and again. I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues to share some of the work that they have done in addressing some of our suspensions, as well as some of the practices that they're putting in place that are in alignment with the requested policy change.
Good afternoon. Good to be here with you. Peter Moran, Director in the Office of School Support and Improvement If we could go to the next slide, please. Yeah. Do you want to take this one, Sean? Okay. All right. If we could go to the next slide. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what this looks like in our schools. As a school system, we are taking a strategic approach to connecting a number of teams across central office to continuously evaluate student behavioral data to identify the disparities in our data, including suspension data, and inform changes that will address those disparities. A grounding thread throughout this cross-office partnership is a commitment to using restorative practices throughout our interactions with students, staff, and families from the outset of addressing behavioral issues and not as a different or added component of our work. We believe a focus on restoration and repair after harm is done is a fundamental approach to supporting strong student behavioral health. Next slide, please. As an example of how schools apply a restorative approach to addressing a student behavioral issue, let's take the example of a student sending a message to her English teacher making threats of violence to the school community. At first look, this action falls into the disruptive behavior category of false alarm, which ranges on the disciplinary response matrix between a level 2, teacher-initiated administrative supported responses, to a level 4, short-term out-of-school exclusionary responses. School teams could also go beyond the recommended range in the Code of Conduct to a level 5 response, long-term out-of-school exclusionary practices, if they determine the level of threat warrants that disciplinary response. Next slide, please. The purely disciplinary approach would have the school administration recommending the student receive a level 5 response, which is an out-of-school exclusionary practice, which in this case could be a 10-day suspension with a recommendation for expulsion. Without digging into the context of the situation, determining more about why it happened, and determining how to repair the harm, student threats to the community have historically often gone straight to a 10-day suspension and recommendation for expulsion. Now let's consider how this scenario looks as we use a restorative approach. In using the restorative approach, we still maintain a focus on school safety. The first step in addressing this behavior is for the school to contact our police partners to help investigate the credibility of the threat. In these cases, our police partners or other agency partners will immediately do a home visit to assess the well-being of the student and to determine if the threat is credible. Let's say in this case, the visit to the student's home revealed that the threat was not credible. The school team then initiated a student behavioral threat assessment and finds that the student is low risk. The behavioral threat assessment involves administration, counseling, security, and central office partners to determine the context of the student's current behaviors and needs. This low-risk determination means that the school team will start taking actions to fact-find on the student's needs and supports that can be put in place to address the reasons why she wrote the letter. You can see on the sequence of actions on the slide that the student received a 4-day out-of-school suspension because the action was disruptive to the safety of the school, but there are also many steps that need to happen to evaluate what actions the school team will take to support the student's anxiety and social-emotional health. After the student returned from her suspension, the school RJ coach met with her and they determined that a meaningful apology to the teacher and a restorative conversation with the teacher would happen. The student and teacher are able to repair their relationship, and the RJ coach considers how to take the learning from this scenario school-wide with a mindfulness lesson and sharing resources for supporting students with anxiety and developing friendships. Now I believe I'll turn it over to Mr. Neff.
Good afternoon, Steve Neff, Director of Pupil Personnel and Attendant Services. You can go to the next slide, please. Ms. Rubin's vision of one OTLS and cross-office supports to schools is always resounding in our heads, and this particular topic is an example of why that's so important. We can only effectively address student behavior, specifically the disproportionality in our student disciplinary data, if we engage more than one office and implement more than one intervention or strategy. All of the offices in OTLS must be actively involved. As you can imagine, the Office of Student and Family Support and Engagement is actively involved in these efforts. Nearly 11,000 staff members have received professional learning in the foundations of restorative justice. About 1,500 staff members have been trained to teach mindfulness strategies in school settings. We're implementing the Leader in Me social emotional learning curriculum in a third of our schools this school year, with the rest of the schools coming on board over the next 2 school years. We continue to reach out to our community partners to increase the mental health supports available to students and families inside our schools and in our community. We're also partnering with our colleagues in the appeals transfer team. They handle the most intensive disciplinary situations to ensure that restorative practices are considered before an event, during the disciplinary process, and after the disciplinary dispensation. We can't do any of this without our school support and improvement director colleagues who supervise and coach their schools as they analyze their school-specific discipline data. We also partner actively with our colleagues in the special education department. So I'll turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Lynch, so he can continue to discuss our collaborative efforts.
Thank you, Steve. Before I describe some of our most recent efforts that are listed here on the slide, I'll remind folks that we actively train staff in a course called Nonviolent Crisis Intervention, which is a 10-unit course. 7 of those units consist specifically of de-escalation strategies. And to this date, we've trained 4,231 staff in those strategies, with an effort to make sure that each of our schools has a team of staff members that are trained in the nonviolent crisis intervention strategies, as well as staff that support special education students in select special education programs. If we look at the slide, there are 3 areas in which we are actively or more recently providing training to staff that we're seeking to expand over the course of this school year and moving forward. We've engaged with some curriculum resources, one of which is called Zones of Regulation, which is designed to proactively support students with the management of self-regulation strategies. We've worked to realign some of our resources with the help of the Board of Education and the addition of some of our mental health social workers, specifically staff, that allowed us to create interdisciplinary teams at 25 of our schools that house our regional supports to students with social emotional disabilities. Those teams are actively supporting their broader school communities and helping to provide consult and strategies around students who may need support with their self-regulation or social emotional needs. We've also partnered recently with the Kennedy Krieger Institute starting this summer as we recognize the need to expand the training for staff members who are working with younger and younger students who are having more significant behavioral needs in the general education setting, and as we work to include students with special education needs in the general education setting. We recognize that general education teachers need to have those strategies at their ready. And in this partnership, just in the summer, we were able to train 400 staff members. This is going to be an ongoing training process that will take place quarterly in partnership with the Kennedy Krieger Institute. Primary focus is those homeschool model teachers that are working with our younger students who need that support. Thank you.
Next slide, please. So there is simply no denying that our students experience trauma, and the effects of COVID-19 have been discussed in this very room regularly, and its impacts. Well-documented studies have correlated the impact of trauma or adverse childhood experiences with negative impacts on student learning and behavior. We thank you for all that you've done in supporting us in our efforts to change our practices. We ask today that you support us still with our efforts to change policy. We ask for a behavioral health management plan or discipline or behavior intervention plan policy that reflects our core beliefs as MCPS. So language that embodies Montgomery County Public Schools core values. So a change from the word discipline to behavior intervention, safety and well-being plan. We ask for support with our language on emphasis on mental health and trauma, and opportunities for implementation of restorative practices and approaches where appropriate while maintaining emphasis on school safety, accountability, and also restoration. We thank you so much.
Thank you. I don't know, do you want to break here for questions and comments, or did you want to go through the policy at all first? I mean, I'm not suggesting you to go through line by line, but if there's anything in particular you wanted to highlight in terms of changes to the actual policy. I have 2 points about some of the verbiage that I want to ask about, but I don't know if this is the time or if we should do questions on this part first.
You know, we didn't intend to go through it line by line since we have done that before, but I did want to call out where some of the sources came from. So I believe our presentation is complete.
Okay, great. Well, then I will. Oh, okay. Well, so I have 2 questions about verbiage in the policy itself. The first one being on line 41, under number 4, where it reads, to clearly communicate to students, staff members, and parents/guardians expected student behaviors and consequences for misbehavior. Would it be possible to add, I'm not sure if it's an adding of the word families or if it's a changing parents/guardians to families, and this is something that I feel like could be a discussion for us, but in having conversations with our fabulous staff, by the way, who has joined us here today, the parents and guardians seems a little
Dated.
yeah, well, right. In other words, they are multi-generational. We have homes that have multi-generational people living in their homes. A family incorporates more than just the parent/guardian. And so just in an effort to kind of continue with the flow of being more inclusive, whether it's changing the word to families or adding the word families is just something that we were discussing. So there's that. And then my other question goes to, in line 24, it reads, positive school cultures and climates that prevent student misbehavior. And on line 36, it reads, expectations and consequences to address disruptive student behavior. So my question is, are we intentionally using 2 separate descriptions of the behavior, disruptive student behavior versus misbehavior, which to me, we are. I'm supportive of, because I think that they are different things. But I just wanted to clarify for the sake of making sure that we are saying what we mean and meaning what we write. So I didn't know if you wanted to speak to that at all. I'm comfortable with keeping it the way it is because I believe that disruptive student behavior and misbehavior are 2 different things. But I wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page. Do you understand what I'm talking about the lines on line 36 versus the verbiage on line 24. I feel like it's an awkward silence. Feel free to jump in there, Dr. Becker.
Well, they're working on it.
Yeah, okay. Well, I didn't know if you had something specific about that. Okay. You had thoughts about it. I'm saying I think that it should be, I think that it is good the way it is my personal opinion. I just want to make sure that we're, for sake of consistency, that it was an intentional difference in verbiage as opposed to we just didn't follow the same language.
So I can note, and then I'll let Ms. Shauna Kay respond, but the prevent student misbehavior that's on line 24 was the language that was there previously, and they kept that phrasing. And then in terms of line 36, where we reference disruptive student misbehavior, I think it's a distinction because of addressing the consequences and talking specifically about disruptive behavior.
Right, okay. Okay.
And also, it was existing language.
Right.
It just happened not to change, so.
Well, that's part of why I was trying to clarify, is because if it was just existing language that we didn't address, or if it was something that we were being intentional about. Dr. Daka?
I have other things to say, but I wanted to speak to the area that you were talking about, disruptive. That word bothers me because it's been overused for years in the state, and what is disruptive behavior? You might want to make a list of things that could possibly be disruptive, because in the past, disruptive has been used to the point where they can call the police in to handle the students. You know, it's the whole state, it's not just us, but I think it's important that that language is kind of, I don't know, can be interpreted in so many ways.
Just a quick comment on that. Would it be possible to change it to behavior that is not in line with the MCPS Student Code of Conduct? Because that is the specific list of expectations for behavior.
So my thinking, just in terms of the difference in some of the languages that, so an example that I gave was, if a student were to misbehave online, for example, at home on the weekend or whatever, that's not something that we would necessarily address. But if it is targeted towards something that becomes disruptive to the school day or to the school operations, then that's a different thing, and then we do engage in that.
Yeah, I think what Dr. Daka is trying to say is that when you use broad language like disruptive or misbehavior, it can be applied to different people differently. Mm-hmm. So when you tie it back to a more specific set of expectations for students that's outlined in the Student Code of Conduct, that's also reviewed annually, that allows it to be more specific.
Mm-hmm.
I think what you were saying about disruptive, using the example of things that are said on internet at home, that the schools become involved because the kids come in and say, this person wrote something about me and all this. So that to me is disruptive. Disruptive means tearing apart. Mm-hmm. My concern with disruptive is that it's so used generally that it could be for talking back. It could be used for bad language. It could be used for refusal to go to another teacher to have a little timeout or to go to the office. And I just think we ought to be clear about that. Maybe staff is clear about that, but it was used so many times before, and the students that it happened to were disproportionately black and brown. So we want to finish with that. Fights is a whole different area. And I just wanted to say about fights, because we've heard that in the news. I don't think it's any different than it ever has been, but they tried to make it sound like it's so much worse now. But it takes a lot of time to do fights, to figure out what's happened between the two people, who else was involved in it. You have to get the counselor involved, maybe teachers can weigh in on behaviors they've seen, and the parents have to be involved. Now, if we're willing to do that, kids will be so bored with us doing that, they will not do it again. So, but it does take an administrator's time, but I think it's at the beginning, and throughout the year, it's going to be a lot easier to deal with it. And that brings us back to restorative practices.
I just want to jump in. I think we all might need to speak up a little bit more. Can everyone hear us? Because I can barely hear my colleagues. So I think it's hard with the mask and then with the, yeah. So I just wanted to jump in and say that. Didn't mean to interrupt.
Nope, thank you.
Well, some of you heard me because you were nodding your heads.
Dr. Daka, you said you had some other things you wanted to?
I'll try to be louder. I'm glad that you have de-escalation in there and that you've been doing some training on that. that is one thing that really bothers me a lot, because sometimes teachers push it to the point where the kids are so angry, they respond very inappropriately, they end up being in the office and sent home because they've just gotten out of control. And I don't know, one case when I first came on was with a security person who had been a police officer, and the student had just gone bonkers in the class, and so they were removing him from the class. He was moving away from the class, but this person kept following him and jumping in front of him and following him and jumping in front of him. And the kid got angrier and angrier about it. He wasn't really hurting anybody. He was mumbling and carrying on to himself. So this is the kind of thing I don't like to see happen, because it's not fair to the students. And I also wanted to say, I'm glad that you are reiterating that some behaviors have to have some consequences. And some people think that restorative justice is what you use in those behaviors. Those 5 serious or 6 serious behaviors have to be dealt with differently. Then you may want to do restorative justice when they come back. And another thing that concerns me is that I don't think principals do this so much, but I think people in the school remember if there was a misbehavior that the student did, they always bring it up to the student, and the student has to live with it forever. We don't want that to happen, and I think restorative justice helps with that. And it also helps that they're talking with the people that they hurt and are hearing from them as well, because it's kind of a two-way thing. And it's just that, anyhow, time needs to be in that. But I really appreciate your thoughtfulness and all the work you've done on this, and we're hoping for keeping students in school as much as we can.
To your points, Ms. Oluni, Ms. Mondrowski, and Dr. Daka, I do believe language is important, and consistency is also important. And so, Ms. Oluni, your suggestion about behavior not in keeping with the MCPS Code of Conduct is appropriate, because it is an appropriate replacement for the word misbehavior as well as disruptive behavior. So in those instances and any other instances where that is not clearly articulated, we would very much be in support of that change, behavior that is not in keeping with the MCPS Code of Conduct.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Oh,
You go. Yeah, you go ahead, girl.
I'm glad that you put in the concern about IEPs.
Oh, yes.
Because sometimes students are manifesting their disability. And if people don't know that, and I know that teachers, all teachers are supposed to be familiar with what the students have on their IEPs. And we have to keep reminding them that they're responsible for all of the students they have in their classes. And that if the behavior doesn't meet the IEP or what we're expecting, of course the special ed persons would be very much involved in that, and they need to work together on it. So thank you.
I'll echo that. Ms. Evans?
Yes, I was just going to say that in the PowerPoint, I appreciate the level of detail that we put around restorative approach. Oftentimes people do believe that there is no accountability that will be placed on our students. And so I love the part that this is about all of us, right? Because it is. And so I think that it makes a huge difference to change the word from discipline to behavioral management. You don't know until, like when I was reading over the materials that we got, I was like, this is a big difference, and words do matter. And I think that if we're not getting to the root cause and we're continuing to have a reoccurrence, that we do need to think about our approach and oftentimes the words that we use. So I like the changes that the Office of Teaching and Learning had, and I know that we're going to go over the underlined information in the policy, but I just wanted to point that out and how we brought it back to our core values. I think it's important for our community to know that we mean what we say and that we want to put action behind our words, and this is a way to do that. So I think that legislation was really important, and the policy change was good for our school system. So I'll let you all get to the policy.
Is that really?
Yeah, I had a few things to say, but I first wanted to echo what Ms. Evans just said about the importance of language and how important it is that we changed our language from discipline. I really appreciate that you put the definition here. We're not training people to obey rules. We're supporting students and teaching them to become productive, kind citizens, members of a community. And I think that this new policy, or at least what I've seen of it, reflects that. I did have a question, and I don't know if you all can answer this, but when you were walking through the case scenario of how this policy would be applied, you mentioned restorative justice coaches at, I believe, our secondary schools. The last time I heard about restorative justice coaches, I believe there were 40-something, and we have 65 secondary schools. So I want to make sure we have one in every school, because I don't want this policy to be applied differently at different schools because of staffing issues. That's something that concerns me. So don't know if someone has an answer to that.
I do. So all secondary schools, middle schools, and elementary schools, I believe we have 66 allocations for our restorative justice coaches. Some schools do choose to split the allocation between more than one teacher. So the stipend is significant because the work is significant. There are some schools that split it between their staff development teacher and another teacher in the building and practice a teaching approach as well as a more hands-on approach, and that differs school to school how it's used. Our secondary restorative justice PLC, those coaches will be meeting on Thursday the 28th in order to debrief and talk about their approach so far. They have created school preambles for how to work. They are continuing to educate the teachers in their schools at the ground level in the practices that teachers trained about this summer with a Tier 1 training for all staff. And so it's really getting up off of the ground in our secondary schools.
Okay, and is that something that's clearly indicated to the public, who that restorative justice coach is? Is it on the staff directory?
I think that's a wonderful idea. It's not, because it's usually a staff member in the school and it's a newer title. For example, resource teacher or resource counselor is indicated. I think that is a fair ask in order to identify those people so that our community, our teachers, our parents can also engage with them as well. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I think it's important for the community and students to know who they should be looking out for. And the last thing I just quickly wanted to say, I heard verbally there mentioned different levels of discipline, or I guess discipline is not the word we're using, behavioral intervention strategies. And I noticed that those weren't on the slides. So if I could maybe get a copy of those, or that could be shared next time, that'd be great.
Sure, so they are linked into the Code of Conduct. They are a part of the presentation. They're a part of each and every action, disciplinary action in the last few pages of the Code of Conduct, as well as a part of the preamble pages. They list the levels and then also give examples of what each level specifically looks like. So what is a level 1 response, like a meaningful apology, versus what is a level 5 response, which might include long-term exclusionary practices.
Would it be, is that linked to this policy and linked in this policy?
Yes, I believe the Code of Conduct is hyperlinked.
Okay.
And it should be right in there. And if
Perfect.
not, we are happy to send it to you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yep.
And one last question for me, just real quick if you can. Talk a little bit about how restorative practices looks in a virtual environment.
That is an excellent question, and it's one that we have been thinking about as well. So one thing that I'm happy to report in thinking about that, our team has looked over the Code of Conduct with great detail, as well as the students' rights and responsibilities. For both documents, the language in the documents applies across platforms. So your rights and responsibilities in person are the same as your rights and responsibilities virtually. And for much of the Code of Conduct, that is true. There are a few places that I would like to extend some of our thinking, and those include academic dishonesty. They include cyberbullying, and they also include extortion. So in those 3 areas in particular, although the Code of Conduct still applies as written, I think those are areas that are more likely areas to impact the virtual environment than some of our other areas like school fight right? So I think in the future, as we go along, that those are areas that we can extend out. But as written, the Code of Conduct does apply to virtual spaces. And also in the policy recommended today in lines 37 and 38, there's language added to include virtual classroom spaces.
So I appreciate that. That was my next question as well. I think you all know I had some examples from student guidance for virtual classrooms, code of conducts, addendums from different counties. And so just making sure that we are continuing to look, because we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's some very good policies here. And I think it might be something that we really need to consider in terms of adding as a separate section of it, just so that we're very clear and specific. There are aspects of things like that I had never even considered, things like you can remove someone from a classroom, or different types of disruptive or disrespectful virtual classroom behaviors that, we're entering a new world. And now whether you're virtual by choice or by circumstance, I think it's important that we are very clear and specific about how we're addressing all aspects of educational experiences. So does anyone have anything else on this?
No, based on what you were saying about looking at other counties, there is a history of that. Before we did our code of conduct, we looked at 5 different counties, and the one that sticks in my mind is Baltimore City, because it was the most complete. But it might be good to look those up and share those.
Yeah.
I just wanted to comment on something that Dr. Daka said that I think is really important, and it was relative to the statement about students having IEPs. One of the things that I think we've done a really effective job of this year is there are 4 offices in the Office of Teaching and Learning in schools. And these decisions shouldn't be made in isolation by one person. People have different specializations, people have different perspectives, and I think we've done a nice job of looking at these situations, coming together, discussing them, and then determining how to appropriately proceed to best support the student. So I just wanted to highlight that, because I think, with Mr. Lynch sitting here, I mean, there are certainly times where we've had discussions about a student that, has an IEP, and to just make sure that we're doing right by that student and the family.
Yes, I thank you for that, because I agree. We see too many of situations where that's an issue, so thank you. If no one has anything else, I will say thank you all very much for your time and your presentation. Thank you for the extensive amount of work you've done on this, and really taking everything into consideration, and really trying to follow our core values. So thank you for that. And then we will move that on forward to the full board, correct? Okay. She said no. So that moves us to item 6, correct?
Andreski, can we just clarify?
Sure.
So,
So we just wanted to clarify the changes that were requested by the committee. We believe it's line 36. Changing the terminology from disruptive student behavior to not in line with the
Yes.
Code of Conduct.
That's correct.
Line 41, referencing parents/guardians to be inclusive of families.
Yeah, we didn't come to a final decision on that. I didn't think in terms of, I don't know if you all want to think about it a little bit before it comes back to the full board, but just somehow incorporating families as part of.
Ms.
Yes.
Mandrowski?
Yeah.
Might I offer for the committee's consideration that we add families, but not in any way remove parents and guardians?
Absolutely,
Because
yes.
parents and guardians have the legal authority
Right.
to make decisions and receive information.
Okay, yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. And then in terms of your decision-making, do you put it for a vote for the committee to move to tentative action to the full board?
Yes, I think I understood what you said. Did you say for our decision-making?
Just wanted to clarify.
Yes, we're going to move it to the full board.
Okay, thank you.
We all agreed. We all agree. All in favor.
Thank you.
Sure. So that moves us to item 6, which is policy ABA, community involvement. Again, just as a little bit of a review, this policy, the action was prompted by a request from Ms. O'Neill and Ms. Zoluni, and one of the central request for reviews comes from a desire to examine public participation opportunities for students, parents, guardians, and community members, so that their ideas, interests, and concerns are considered and valued as much as possible in our board-making decision process. Ms. Olunia, did you want to say anything before we get started and I let the team take it over?
I would love to, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, so I asked Ms. O'Neill if we could add this policy to our work plan for this year because of the experiences that I've had working with community engagement groups, work groups, and the experiences I know my other peers have had serving on different work groups. A lot of times, I was the only student, one of 2 students in the room while big decisions about standardized testing and mental health and calendar decisions were being made, and oftentimes the other student in the room would be from, if not the same school, then a school in a very similar region. And so I see that as a really, really big problem. The reason I want to look at this policy is so we can brainstorm innovative ways we can bring more students to central office, more students on work groups, and more students from specifically diverse backgrounds and diverse regions of the county. Some ideas that I was considering and would love to speak with my colleagues and staff about instituting some kind of percentage quota on work groups, saying 40% of members have to be students. The number is negotiable, that's just an idea. And the students must represent all of the board districts. Something along those lines, so that we're making sure that we're getting geographic, demographic diversity, as well as more students in decision makings. I think we can all agree that that's who we should be hearing from most when we're talking about how our policies have been working and have not been working. Those are the people who it impacts firsthand and who have experienced it firsthand, especially coming out of a pandemic. So yeah, that's why I wanted to take a look at this policy.
And I appreciate that very much. I will specify that I think when you're working on the language, it's important to somehow, and I'm not sure how you word it appropriately, but to make sure that not only are we getting students from all across the region, but they don't need to be the honor students, all the time. I want to hear from kids who I feel like school's failing for, and why is that, and what, I want a broad range of perspectives on our issues, whether it's special education, ESOL, like I said, high flyers, kids who need more supports, whatever that situation might be. Dr. Daka?
Yeah, I know I brought this up when we were doing the information that we were giving to the search committee, that we needed students of all different levels. It's really important. But I understand that some students may not have the transportation, may not have the parents that can bring them. We need to send Ubers for them.
Yes.
I mean, we really need to go out for these students, because we've been saying this for a long time.
Exactly.
And the students that we're not doing well with, we don't get a chance to talk with them to see what it is that could help them. That's why I put the new business on the board, which we did accept, for the students that had a 2.0 average and were suspended. Those are the kinds of students we need to be able to talk with, because we don't want to keep them being suspended. But I haven't heard what we're doing about it yet, but I know that it's in the air.
And just one last thing to address Ms. Mandrowski's comment about finding non-traditional leaders or even students who aren't leaders within their schools. Something I spoke with Dr. McKnight about and some other staff, working with teachers and asking them to nominate students,
Yes.
right? They are the ones who see students interacting in classrooms, and if students have complaints about MCPS or their schools, they tell their classmates and teachers over here. So those kinds of processes, innovative solutions that maybe our neighbors haven't thought of yet, are things I'm interested in exploring.
Yes. Well, I appreciate all of that, that being the framework for the review that's going to be presented today. We can begin our work on the policy, and I will turn it over to you all.
Thank you. Mr. Landesman, Ms. Frost, and Mr. Hernandez have joined us at the table. They will be presenting a framework for a review of policy ABA community involvement, which was last revised in 2013. It affirms the board's commitment to ongoing collaborative and productive communication, as well as its intention to consider ideas, interests, and concerns of its stakeholders in the decision-making processes. This review of policy ABA provides an opportunity to review related policies and identify procedures in need of updates. I'll turn it over to Mr. Landesman to introduce himself and his team and the draft framework that they have prepared.
Good afternoon, Ms. Mandrowski and committee. My name is John Landsman, and I am the Executive Director in the Office of Strategic Initiatives, formerly the Coordinator of Study Circles in the Equity Unit, and I'm a parent of 2 MCPS students. I'm excited to be here with my 2 colleagues, Francis Frost and Edwin Hernandez. Ms. Frost is the Assistant to the Associate Superintendent in the Office of Student and Family Support and Engagement, and also someone nationally known for her work in family engagement. Mr. Hernandez is an equity specialist in the Equity Initiatives Unit and has done amazing work over the past few years engaging families, students, and community members who others say we can't reach. We're here today to propose a framework for revising the board's policy ABA on community engagement. But before we begin, we wanted to give a couple of examples of why this work is so important. And I should say off the top that my examples were around parents, but we also have many of similar examples around students, which I'm happy to share. Since coming to Montgomery County Schools almost 18 years ago, I frequently hear about hard to reach families, hard to reach students, hard to reach community members. And in my experience, none of those parents, none of those students, none of those community members are hard to reach when we're intentional about who and how we want to reach them. 2 examples come to mind. Several years ago, I was doing a 6-session study circle with a Germantown elementary school. One of the parent participants took 3 buses each way, each week, to participate in the study circle. That parent was never at a PTA meeting, didn't know how to get onto Edline when she came to the study circle, and wouldn't be in any of these committees. But in the study circle, she felt heard, she felt seen. It wasn't just about getting her, because it would have been great to send her an Uber. But if we don't have the process to run the meeting in a way where she feels valued, then it won't matter how we get them there. Another example is more recent. Last year, Principal Jamila Denny from Pinecrest Elementary School realized there was a group of students that they were not engaging. This was during online school. And she and her staff were out of ideas. But she thought if she could engage some parents in problem solving together, they could come up with solutions that she and her staff couldn't do on their own. They reached out to the equity unit, and with the help of Mr. Hernandez, we engaged them in 3 sessions where parents mostly spoke Spanish, the staff and administration mostly spoke English, but they were actually able to get to the root of some of these problems and come up with actionable solutions for how the school could do things differently. And Ms. Denny saw those parents as partners and realized that she needed to create a structure, not just to ask them questions, but to create a structure where they felt like they could participate, that their experience was valued, and that they would be heard. And so, Ms. Looney, I would love to talk to you more about some of your ideas, and as others. We have very similar experiences with students. where we have facilitated conversations with a school with ELL students where the school wasn't connecting with them, but we were able to get the ELL students, parents, and staff to truly engage with each other. We've done the same at a school where we had the most disengaged students who the school basically told us they're never going to participate. But by the end of the session, they were sharing very specific ideas on how their experience could be changed. So with that, I'm excited to be on this committee because I do believe we have the strategies. We just need to update the policy and our intention to match our needs and our expertise. So with that, we can go to the next slide, and I will turn it over to Ms. Frost. We go to the next slide.
Good afternoon. As John said, we're here to talk about the policy around community involvement. And what we're going to talk about a little bit is our approach on how we're looking at that policy. As he stated, there's a level of developing the policy, and then there's the application. And so we're setting that framework so that it can be applied in the way that you all indicated to increase diversity and increase inclusion of all of our communities. So we'll start out by benchmarking other models and strategies from other school districts as well as other family engagement and relevant institutions. Coincidentally, this review of the policy is also in the same time as the National PTA's review of their family school partnership, upon which this policy draws upon, as well as our family involvement policy. So the timing works well. That review of the family and school partnership is based on current research in family engagement, as well as the acknowledgement of the change of the cultural demographics of our school districts and school students. And so much of that research will be relevant to what we're looking at in our policy as well. We'll also look, as was mentioned earlier, this community involvement policy is related to other board policies. For instance, the school naming policy, which I think we're going to come back to you all later about, policy FFA, and then other policies, including the family and school involvement policy. So this is a basis for those. And then lastly, we're going to consider the benefits, barriers, and parameters of engaging with students, parents, and guardians, and community members so that we have diverse representation, looking at not only race, but as was indicated, where, demographics of location, what school, income, and all of those different demographics to make sure that we're being inclusive of our community members who are not normally represented in such district-wide or even school-wide opportunities to share their opinions and share the impact of different policies on their education, and so that we can reach these values of being more inclusive and equitable in our school district. And Mr. Hernandez will talk a little bit about the next steps for reviewing this policy.
Thank you, Francis. There is something inside of me that just wants to jump out and tell you how excited I am to talk in front of you about this policy. Thank you, Ms. Aloni and Ms. O'Neill, for getting this policy revised. I came to the United States in the mid-'80s. I was born in Guatemala, and my mother only came to my school 3 times in my time from 3rd grade to 12. One when I was suspended for 2 days, and then when I graduated from 6th grade, and when I graduated from high school. Now, it's not that my mother was not interested in my schooling, but I think that one of the things that I see in working with parents in our communities in MCPS is how intentional we are. So this is why I'm so excited, and there's something that just wants to jump out of my body because this is how I feel. And what we're going to do, so going back to our work, in November of this year, our approach is going to be, next slide please, we would like to engage a diverse a group of stakeholders in think about, have their input as to what they would like to change change in the policy. Then we would like to bring this back to you in December and see what revisions we have made from that input that we received in November. And in January, bring it to the full board. And then we would like in February, March, to go back to the stakeholders to get comment on the revisions. And then in April, bring it back again to this committee to share what we have heard from stakeholders on the revisions, and in May, bring it to the full board for final vote. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and I want to turn it back to Ms. Mandrowski.
Thank you. Well, I'm very excited, and your enthusiasm is very contagious, and it's exciting to see, because you know that when you have people who are passionate about and excited about the work that they're doing, they're going to do good work. So I very much look forward to seeing what you all come forward with. Colleagues, anybody have anything that they want to add before we move on?
I was just going to say, though, it's great that we're doing this, especially when I think about how the Office of Student and Family Supported Engagement is doing their work differently. With our pop-ups, we're trying to be more intentional in not having our community come to us, but to go to where they are. And so it is great that we are updating our policies on our approach and being more inclusive. And we do want to get our parents more involved. And thank you, Mr. Lansman, for sharing the stories that you shared, because there are so many parents out there that want to be a part of their students' education, the process, and some just don't know, right? And so I think it's important that we're finding them, letting them know that we care, that we want them to be involved, and here are the ways that they can get involved. So no, this is really good. That we're doing this, and I look forward to hearing about the meetings and getting the comments and hearing what the parents are saying to help better inform and make our policy as good as it can be. So those are just my thoughts right there. So and then one question I was going to ask: have you all decided where you're going to go, or how you're going to decide where you're going to go to talk to a wide variety of our parents and families?
So we haven't come up with the exact strategy yet. We've had lots of conversations. We have connected with the different community groups and to just get started, but we don't have the strategy yet, which will be done in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, very good. And I'm sure our broader community does not know, but I know that you are very steeped in our community, as well as Ms. Frost and Mr. Hernandez. I don't know about you, but I'm sure Mr. Lansman has done work with Impact Silver Spring, who works with groups out in our community. And then, as we mentioned about Ms. Frost, with her work at the national level for PTA. So definitely, we do know you all have a breadth and wealth of knowledge and access. So thank you.
And I do want to jump in reference to Ms. Evans' comment about, we're doing some things different. I feel I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity, which I'm sure we will also do at the board meeting, but to introduce our new unbuttons person, Mr. Fitzpatrick, who will be also being involved in reaching out to our community and helping with families and community and students concerns, staff as well. So just wanted to say welcome and thank you for what you're going to be doing for us. And hopefully you all can work together to include him in some of the discussions as different ways of doing the outreach. So Ms. O'Looney?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Ms. Evans said and thank you everyone for sharing personal stories. I think that is what we need to be keeping in mind as we do this work. How do we reach parents like the ones you both mentioned? Because I think the parents, the students, the families that are the most disengaged are the ones that we can learn the most from. And that is where we will get the best feedback and improve our school system. So thank you.
Okay.
It was great hearing from all of you, but Mr. Lansman, I think it was really important to talk about study circles and inviting those people in who ordinarily wouldn't have come, but accepting what they were saying, understanding what they were saying, allowing them to say that. Because we've been to meetings where we've had people who speak other languages with their earphones on, translator, and they didn't get a chance to say anything. So it's a whole different philosophy, and we thank you for it, all of you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent point, Dr. Daka, thank you. Okay, so unless anybody has anything else, we will continue to move on to item number 7, which is the policy JHC, child abuse and neglect. This is the time for the committee to receive an annual update on implementation of the child abuse and neglect policy and give us some overview of how things are going with that and if there are anything that we need to really take a look at. So I will turn it back over to you all.
Thank you, Ms. Mondrowski. Mr. Edmondson, the Director of Student Welfare and Compliance, is joining us at the table, and Mrs. Michael Simmons is also here, the Director of the Department of Compliance and Investigations, and they will be presenting the annual update on the implementation of policy JHC, child abuse and neglect. Mr. Edmondson?
Thank you, and good afternoon. I think it's on. Do we have slides for? Okay, great. So yes, this is our annual update on the implementation of policy JHC, child abuse and neglect, and we do appreciate the time to update you on where we are. As you are very well aware, the last 20 months have been a challenge in this area to ensure that we are providing our students with the supports that they need from any type of abuse that might be going on in the home or under caretakers. And so thank you for this opportunity. Next slide, please. So as stated annually in our policy, our charge is to ensure that we are providing a safe and engaging environment for our students. And it's through that vigilant efforts through all members of the MCPS community that we are ensuring that we understand the most recent data and training opportunities available to be able to recognize any type of abuse, know how to report it, and then intervene with the supports that we need for our students and our vulnerable adults. Also, equally important is to have an efficient and effective collaborative approach with our external stakeholders and our external agencies and partners that we work with, specifically along the lines of Child Welfare Services, the State's Attorney's Office, and our police partners, and specifically in SVID. Next slide, please. So again, as you are very well aware, in July of 2020, the board did approve the recovery of education plan, specifically that in the fall of 2020, we would remain virtual, and to ensure that we were providing our staff who were working with our students in a virtual environment, we had to work very closely to develop and provide resources for that staff, because it's very difficult to identify and to recognize some signs of abuse when you're face-to-face with children or others. And to be able to do that through a computer screen is significantly more difficult. So starting back in April of 20, leading up to the start of this school year, we were working very closely with Department of Health and Human Services, our Family Justice Center, and our state's attorney to develop resources that we sent out through our counseling department, sent out online, sent out through multiple different venues and avenues, so that our teachers understood how to communicate. Sometimes you might have an abuse situation in the home, the child's on a screen, and the abuser could be on the other side of that screen. And it's really hard to communicate with your trusted adult in the school system when the person could be or possibly could be in the same room. And so we had to really work and provide our teachers and our employees, our staff with strategies to be able to have those conversations. We developed, as it's mentioned on the slide, Searching for Signs, which was geared towards that online virtual environment. We worked with our partners to develop guidelines for online welfare, as I mentioned, but specifically around welfare check protocols. So during the pre-pandemic times, if we had a concern about a child, our pupil personnel worker might go out with the counselor and do a home visit. We weren't able to do those home visits as easily, of course, but we still were able to work with our police departments and our safety and security team to be able to have those visits when and where we really needed to. And we improved on that checklist to be able to go through in order to determine if this was one where we really had to go and get out to the home and see what's happening. And again, that really was a collaborative approach with our police department and with our other external partners. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we work very closely with our school social workers, also our Child Protective Services, CPS social workers, making sure that we had the processes and the systems in place and everybody understood when it was at that time where we may need to intervene with our, especially when we were in our virtual learning. One other thing, and I know Mr. Everett Davis is here. Last year during COVID, we really established a great system called student well-being teams, and those teams were implemented in every school. So prior to this year, we had attendance matters teams, and we had teams with counselors who would lead it to make sure we were monitoring the needs and supports of our students. But these student well-being teams have been really giving us some great feedback about how important they are, making sure that it's not just what's happening with their academics, but maybe there is something that's going on that we need to look more closely at. So I really do credit the Office of Student Family Supports and Engagement to make sure those were up and running for all of our schools. And I wanted to mention that. Next slide, please. So the training has been consistent over the past several years, especially along the lines of child abuse and neglect. It's part of our 11-module district-wide mandatory training. So all of our employees, volunteers, they have a different type of module, and our substitutes, they are all trained in child abuse and neglect. We did provide enhanced training this year for a leadership development program. We provided enhanced training for all of our counselors. At the start of last school year, start of 2021 school year, with our counselors, PPWs, our parent community coordinators, bilingual assessment team, and one that's not mentioned on there, our ESOL transition counselors were a big part of that as well. And we also spent extra time this past year on safety in the digital age, because we were so involved with the virtual learning, but our students were also equally engaged at a significant increase on their devices, not just for class, but for communicating with each other, and sometimes with our employees. And we wanted to make sure that our employees were trained to know how to professionally and appropriately communicate with our students along those lines too. So we spent extra time on that module as well. Throughout, you're very aware of and you will be more aware as we're responding to some closed session questions over the past week about the sexual harassment and the bullying that you've had questions about. And you're aware that we provide our students with culture of respect module on how to recognize and report. Well, out of that work also came a ways to report, and we included our child abuse and neglect processes with those multiple ways to report. So that's been a part of our process as well. Next slide, please. The implementation with regards to screening of our new and existing employees has remained consistent from the year before. We have our National Association of State Directors of Teacher Education and Certification Clearinghouse that we still take every new employee through. We have House Bill 486 on child abuse, child sexual abuse and sexual misconduct prevention. We are still using the RAP Act, the FBI program, eliminating the needs for repeated background checks. And again, our training with our volunteers through the child abuse and neglect training, what we call the VCAN. Although all of last year we did not permit volunteers in our schools because we were virtual, and even when we came back at the hybrid level in March, we still held off on volunteers. But we did remain open, and we provided our volunteers with support, because currently it is a 3-year rotational, and so they were allowed to take it and having it out of the way, so we wanted to make sure that that was accessible to them. Next slide, thank you. Again, we have been collaborating with the Office of General Counsel, our Equity Initiatives Unit, our Student Leadership and Extracurricular Activities, specifically our Department of Compliance and Investigation. Ms. Simmons is with me here, and really providing our school administration this past late part of last year's school year to ensure that they were, if you could change the slide, that they were up on the recent board changes to specifically, yes, it's in there, so to specifically policies ACA, ACF, and the new policy ACI, which is sexual harassment of our employees. And as I kind of jumped ahead of myself with my notes, but understanding the intersectionality of not just bullying and harassment or sexual harassment even of students, but where and when it happens and who's responsible for supervising or even taking care of a student. There's many times where we're not just involving one agency, but we might be referring it to Child Protective Services because there is a caretaker situation. So I wanted to mention that training as part of our implementation of the policy. Next slide, please. And last spring, in a virtual forum, the Child Welfare Services did conduct a spring stakeholder forum, which brought in not just MCPS, but many of the significant mental health services that the county contracts out to support students and their families. They held a forum last April, and we were involved in that, and it helped us just stay on the leading edge of the information that's out there, as well as the training that might be available for our employees for the future. Next slide. And again, I referred to this. I'm very proud of the collaboration of our State's Attorney's Office and the police and Child Welfare Services, and as well as our Montgomery County PTA. We're specifically around our LGBTQ subgroup, making sure that when we were developing, for example, the last spring's Pride Town Hall, that we had supports available for our students as sometimes a difficult conversation with our LGBT community to make sure they're supported, even in the home. Sometimes that they're more supported than other times by their own parents within that community. So we wanted to make sure that they had the tools and the resources that they needed. Next slide, please. So last year, we received 1,784 suspected incidents of child abuse and neglect. Typically, about 1 in 10 is picked up by CPS with regards to having enough information or having a need to be investigated or looked at even to the next level by Child Welfare Services. It was a significant drop, as you could expect, from the year before when we had 2,720. Where we were, that would be the FY20, which is 19 and 20, which most of our school year was in school until March of 2020. And even prior to that, we were above the 3,000 reports. If you break down the numbers, and I think it's in the memo, we were, before the pandemic, we were averaging about 25 reports a day from our 208 schools and offices. And during the early parts of the pandemic in April of 2020, we dropped to about 2 a day. And then we returned last fall to about 7 or 8. Currently this year, and we'll include it in next year's report because it's 2021, but we're back up to about 22 or 23 a day with us being back at school full-time 5 days a week. And so people initially are alerted to that and disturbed. To me, it's a great sign that we are supporting our students where and when we need to. Some people may even chalk it up to over-reporting, but through our training program, we want to make sure that we would err on the side of, like I said, 1 in 10 might be taken to the next level, but we want to make sure that our students are supported. And if we suspect at all, our guidance to our schools is to report it, and then we can follow up afterwards.
Mr. Edmondson, can I ask you a quick question? The fiscal year 21, is that July to July? Because we're not there yet.
Which one we looking at? So fiscal year 21 would be of September 20 to this past June 30th of 21. So that's last school year, 2021.
Got it, okay. Just clarifying. It was a full year.
So that was for this, this report is for fiscal year 21, because we're in fiscal year 22 now.
Right, okay.
I got that right?
Yes.
All right, good.
Yes, thank you.
Confusing me. I'm confusing me. Okay, so next slide, please. And so this data is based on, as you know, 3.5 years ago, we went to online reporting. It was one of the, it was a huge success for us. Of the 1,784 that were reported, 1,703 were reported through the online system. So we still have the paper copies available, but it's been a huge success. And again, the significance of that is how quickly our partners receive that, because they are a part of this online reporting. So CPS gets it as soon as we get it, as soon as the police get it, as well as our state's attorney. And then when we have meetings like we had earlier today, talking about these cases and how we can support our students, everybody has the information right in front of them digitally, which is really nice and important. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Michael Simmons, who is the Director of Compliance and Investigations and supports our schools through incidents involving employees.
Good afternoon. The cases that are suspected abuse by our staff and employees, as they're reported to us, there's a clear process by which we move forward, and we absolutely work with CPS and the police in order to make sure that we're investigating those. Those are first reported to CPS and or SVID. They will screen them in or screen them out. If they are screened in, then the process is that our staff members are placed on administrative leave with pay. From there, CPS will do their investigation, SVID will do their investigation. They have a ruling and a finding, and then it comes back to us for our investigation. Many times individuals are not clear why we do not simply fire someone who is indicated, okay? And that's because we would terminate someone based on the COMAR regulations and rules in the law. And that's based on our own regulations and our own policies that have been violated through the process. Clearly, we know that individuals who are indicated do have an opportunity, both in the courts, if they're found guilty, or if they're indicated in a finding for CPS, they do have an opportunity to appeal. And those appeals can be lengthy at best. So that's the reason why we cease when they first make the ruling. If it's indicated for CPS or if they're pressing charges by the police, then we're at liberty to move forward with our investigations to make determinations. And any of our cases, and clearly I heard someone say earlier that individuals are innocent until proven guilty, we'd like to make sure that we do a facts-based investigation to make a determination and a recommendation and then a finding. So I just wanted you to know the background with respect to that. We also review our contractors as well as volunteers through RATBAC or any other means through fingerprinting, and if there are reports that we would then investigate, even though they're external to our they're not a part of our candidate or our employee pool, we still investigate those as well. So last year, there were a total of 38 reports of employees. 27 of those were screened out. 3 were ruled out, meaning CPS investigated and they found that there was no finding, or they were unsubstantiated, meaning something occurred, but they're either A, there's no way to know who did what occurred, or if there's a named maltreater, for instance, individuals taking a child to the safe room, a child inadvertently gets scratched. Yes, that person did that. Sometimes it's unsubstantiated, but then there are times when they believe there was excessive assistance, and so that a maltreater is named. And then there were 2 that were indicated. The cases that are indicated generally for CPS, they would be found if they're physical abuse or sexual abuse. Sexual abuse clearly would go to SVID, and then they would do an investigation, and perhaps there would be charges filed in the courts. And then those who are indicated simply for CPS, again, we would go through our process and investigate. All cases, by virtue of the regulation, are investigated by our office, either with the schools, supporting schools to go through those investigations, or ourselves. The same is true with volunteers. Last year, there were none. For contractors, there were 2 reports, and the 2 reports were screened out. But again, we review those thoroughly. Next slide. So in the cases of individuals who are found or indicated for sexual misconduct, physical abuse, we have an opportunity as a system, in fact, we have a responsibility as a system to request the suspension and/or revocation of an individual certificate if they're certificated staff members. And so as we go through that process, there are clear guidelines and guidance within COMAR that dictate whether we ask for one or the other. Currently, we have those that are pending revocation, and those are an employee who was dismissed for sexual misconduct involving students. Those cases where there are indicated findings or definitely charges are posted, and those are the ones that move forward. And I don't like to use this particular case, but Kabongo, for instance, we know that that's posted and it's common knowledge, and we make sure that the community is aware. There are also individuals who are dismissed after criminal charges. There's a pending revocation request. We have individuals who have resigned after notice of misconduct involving students. That too is pending revocation or suspension of a certificate. We have sexual misconduct involving students. Currently, we have 1 pending revocation and an employee dismissed after criminal charges of alleged sexual misconduct. We have, and again, we have 1 that's a pending revocation, and then there's another for an employee who was dismissed for misconduct involving a student, and that's pending suspension of their certificate at this time. Next slide. This is yours. With respect to Title VII, the lawsuit.
Oh, so yeah, we just included this as part of some of the notes for the memo that you have in front of you with regards to any related cases that would be involved in with child abuse and neglect. So just giving you case numbers and the dockets.
That are currently going on.
Correct. Next slide, please. And again, there's 2 more cases there with regards to being open and moving through, and next slide as well, sorry. And then any considerations with regards to FY22 that we are currently in, continuing our efforts along the way, attending, again, the different opportunities that we can with regards to our partners, locally and even nationally, continuing to work with companies like Presidium to make sure that we have the most recent resources available and training available for our upcoming compliance training, as well as just any other supports that we need to provide for our schools. And then just our information there for any contact that you might need from Ms. Simmons or myself. Next slide. And again, we just included that as part of how we're trying to align our work as best we can with the district goals. I think next is for questions or comments. Back to you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I'm going to let my colleagues jump in, but I have one clarifying question, actually 2 quick clarifying questions. On the page which lists the steps, how many number of reports, the number screened out, and all of that, I don't understand necessarily the numbers. They don't seem to add up to me, and so I'm curious as to if we had 38 reports, 27 are screened out automatically, which I guess means they found no bearing for a real investigation, correct? So that leaves 11 cases. 3 of those were ruled out, bringing it to 8. And then you've got 1 unsubstantiated, so 7. And then you've got 2 that are indicated, which means that they've been found to have an issue. So the 3 ongoing, and then where's the other 2?
So there were a few that were holdovers from last year, and then there are some that were moving through. At the time of this report, there were 2 that were outstanding, and I think they were included because in the process, because we still had some last year that were outstanding, and yet there were still 2 more this year that came forward. So they weren't included in the total.
They were included in the total number of reports, but not included in the outcomes?
Correct, because they were still outstanding. So there are cases that were called, so the cases are ongoing. CPS, for instance, there are cases that were reported, like for instance today, but CPS has not notified me of their outcome yet. And they notify me generally the day after or the day after that. So we're not sure they're still outstanding. With CPS, they've not told us specifically what that outcome will be at the time of this report.
Oh, okay. And we didn't want to just include them in the ongoing because they're still potentially ongoing?
Correct, but they were brand new, and so they were not ongoing at the time because we're not sure if they were screened out or not.
Okay. So then just again to kind of clarify this, so this 38, so you had said it went from a roughly 25 or 24, was that a month? Reported cases of child abuse. Then it went down to 2.
That was per day.
Oh, a day. Okay, and now we're back up to 23?
22, 23, yes.
22, 23 per day. So this number of reports.
Involving employees, that's just all reports that come in.
Right, exactly. Okay, but I was just curious then with this number of reports, I mean, I know this isn't employees, but how long of a period, is that per year?
For which, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, employees, 38 number of reports.
That was for all of last year, 38
so
that
that was a
involved
year.
our employees.
Okay, just wanted
Again,
to
it
clarify.
doesn't add up because there's just 2 we didn't have anything to put in there because we
Right.
didn't know yet.
Okay, thank you. To my colleagues, Ms. O'Looney? No? Ms. Evans? Anything you want to add? And Dr. Daka?
Yes, I just wanted to say that the training was crisp and effective and instructive. And I'm saying to my board colleagues and those in the future, we have to keep the training going. I've seen too many programs in this system that have really been good. They've lasted 3 years, and we never know what has happened with them. But this is really important because it gives a message to the community and to staff that we're serious about this, and they need to report anything they see. And we can find out whether it's, okay or not, but they need to be cognizant of the fact that we are supporting them when they report. So thank you so much for your work.
Yeah, Dr. Daka, I totally agree. And you can see that it's working just based on the numbers, the differentiation between during COVID and not during COVID. So thank you for comments because completely agree. So hopefully we'll.
Oh, wait, I forgot something. You know, I always do. The well-being teams, we used to have them when there was a federal grant for it, and then they just fell off. And I'm so glad to see them back. They really are important because they have different people who can look at the concerns that students may have. Thank you.
They're good. So, okay. Well, thank you all very much. I guess then there isn't any extra action needed to take with this particular policy, right? It's just the annual review. Okay. So keep up the good work. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. All righty then. I don't have anything else on our list other than adjournment, unless my colleagues have anything that they want to add or concerns or discussion. No? All right, well then, consider us adjourned.